Oh, wait. Just in here.
Where are you going to stand?
I think here.
So,
Hi, I'm Lily, and I'm going to be presenting on the effects of anxiety disorders on the way the brain can function. When deciding my 20% project, I knew I really wanted to do something involving the brain because I find it really fascinating. The brain is so complex, yet it really makes somebody the way they are by determining things like their personality and their behaviors. I didn't quite know what part of the brain I wanted to be focusing on, which was beginning to stress me out as the deadlines were approaching. The stress I was feeling actually caused me to begin to wonder about anxiety and then specifically anxiety disorders in the brain. During this presentation, I'm going to be discussing the stress response in the brain, the causes of anxiety disorders, the effects of those anxiety disorders on the way the brain can work, and then I'm going to finish with some tips for managing everyday stress. To begin, I'm just going to give a background on what anxiety disorders are, even though most of you probably already know. Anxiety disorders are described as persistent or excessive feelings of fear or anxiety that end up interfering with your everyday life. There are 11 different types of anxiety disorders, and these are categorized based on different causes or different symptoms. The current treatments being used include various forms of medication, and the purpose of all these medications is just to relax your mind, as well as different forms of therapy where the patient with anxiety disorders works with a professional therapist to identify what's causing the anxiety, as well as work on ways to deal with what to do when that anxiety does occur. When I was doing my research, I found that I was really interested in the brain's response to stress. And this is general for everybody, not just people with anxiety disorders, since everybody deals with stress. This is also known as the fight or flight response, and it begins in your thalamus. The thalamus is a region of your brain that receives incoming stimuli and sensory signals. When your thalamus senses anything in your environment that could be of any particular threat to you, it's going to send signals to both your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex, which are two very different regions of your brain. Your prefrontal cortex is located in your frontal lobe, and the purpose of the prefrontal cortex is it deals with a lot of thinking type of work, such as memory and problem-solving skills. The amygdala is located in your emotional brain, and the role of the amygdala is to assess the emotional significance of your environment. Specifically, that means that the amygdala is going to assess whether or not anything in your environment could be of any particular threat to you. So when the thalamus sends that signal, if the amygdala perceives it as a threat, it's going to activate this stress response within seconds. And that can be really helpful during a dangerous situation because the ability for this change to occur so quickly is life-saving. However, this ability for it to occur so quickly isn't as helpful when your amygdala can perceive something like a test as the equivalent threat as something dangerous, because your prefrontal cortex has no time to kind of rationalize and explain why this isn't really stressful. When the amygdala perceives it as a threat, it's going to create an intense unconscious emotional response, basically shutting down your prefrontal cortex, and that's why you find it so difficult to think clearly during a stressful situation. Your amygdala is then going to send a signal to your hypothalamus. The role of the hypothalamus is to communicate with your autonomic nervous system, which basically means it's just going to control a lot of your bodily functions. And your hypothalamus is then going to activate your sympathetic nervous system, which is going to change the way your body's functioning by giving it a burst of energy. So to put the stress response in an analogy, if the stress response was a car, then the sympathetic nervous system would basically be the gas pedal. It's going to kind of rev you up. It's going to give you that energy because that would increase your survival chances in the case of a real threat. Your sympathetic nervous system is then going to send a signal to your adrenal glands, triggering the release of epinephrine throughout your body. And that's known as that rush of adrenaline you get during a stressful situation. The epinephrine is actually going to change the way your body's functioning by doing things like increasing your respiratory rate and increasing your heart rate, things like that, because those would all increase your survival chances in the case of a real threat. Your hypothalamus is then going to activate the second component of your stress response, which is known as the HPA axis. And that stands for hypothalamus, pituitary glands, and adrenal glands. And basically those are all just going to work together to keep your body functioning at this faster rate. Back to the car analogy, if the sympathetic nervous system was the gas pedal, then your HPA axis would basically be the foot pressing down because it's going to keep everything running at a faster rate. Your hypothalamus is then going to trigger the release of your second stress hormone, which is known as cortisol. And the purpose of cortisol is it's going to run throughout your brain and body, and that's just going to keep you on high alert, and you're going to become more present in your environment. And all these changes are occurring because based on the signals your amygdala is sending, you're in a life-threatening situation, and these bodily changes would allow you to either fight or flee the conflict and have better chances of survival, which is why it's called fight or flight response. Once the amygdala perceives whatever that threat was as gone, it's going to send a signal to your hypothalamus, which is going to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which is the opposite of your sympathetic nervous system. Your parasympathetic nervous system basically is going to act as the brake in the situation, and it's just going to slow everything down. It's going to allow your cortisol and your epinephrine levels to fall back to normal because it's going to stop the release of any more stress hormones, as well as it's just going to bring your mind and body back to homeostasis, which is basically the resting period. And that's the whole stress response. And that can be a lot, but that's just why, that's what's going to create that feeling of anxiety and stress. The stress response, like I said earlier, is so important for human survival because of its ability to occur so quickly. An example, if you're in the way of an oncoming car, your brain can basically send a signal to your body to jump out of the way so quickly that you don't even realize that you're thinking about it. In situations like that, the ability for this response to occur so quickly is really helpful. However, if your amygdala perceives things such as tests or something like this presentation as the equivalent threat as an oncoming car, then it's not going to be as helpful because your prefrontal cortex is going to have no time to rationalize and explain why you really shouldn't be getting stressed out. That's why some scientists call it amygdala hijacks, because the amygdala is basically overpowering the rest of your brain, and the emotional brain is going to overpower your cognitive brain. Anxiety disorders are caused when your amygdala becomes hyperactive, which means it's going to be more prone to perceiving things as threats than they really should be, which is going to cause the stress response to occur more often, creating that persistent feeling of anxiety. The effects on the brains with anxiety disorders or chronic stress. Like I said earlier, during the stress response, the amygdala is going to create an intense unconscious emotional response, which basically shuts down your prefrontal cortex. Since your prefrontal cortex is in charge of things like memory, problem solving, and thinking, that's why it can be so difficult for your cognitive brain to function at its usual rate during a stressful situation. The example I like to use is when you go up for a presentation, a lot of times you can find it so much more difficult to remember what you were planning on saying. And that's because that's an example of how your prefrontal cortex is being limited. The abilities of it are being compromised. Additionally, high levels of cortisol can actually create a really damaging cycle in your brain, which is going to affect the way it can function. Cortisol was that stress hormone I talked about earlier, and the purpose of it is to keep your body on high alert. Since people with anxiety disorders experience the stress response more often, their bodies are producing higher levels of cortisol, and that's going to create a buildup in the brain, which can actually be really damaging. A buildup of cortisol in the brain actually causes it will kill your brain cells, it shrinks the size of your prefrontal cortex, as well as increase the size of your amygdala. And when you think about that, that's going to be an anxiety-producing cycle. If the size of your amygdala is being increased, that's going to mean it's going to be more prone to becoming hyperactive and perceiving more things as threats than they really should be. And if the size of your prefrontal cortex is being shrunk, that means you're going to find it even more difficult to rationalize and think clearly about situations and try to calm yourself down, which is going to cause the stress response to occur more often, producing more cortisol, which is going to create even more of a buildup. And that's just really damaging for the way your brain can work, which is why it's so important to be able to deal with everyday stress, which is why, wait, the clicker stopped working. Okay, that's why my next slide is about treatments for everyday stress. So the whole idea to prevent yourself from having more of these amygdala hijacks, it's important to work on your emotional intelligence, which means you want to strengthen the connections between the emotional regions of your brain, like your amygdala, and the cognitive regions of your brain, like your prefrontal cortex. And the best way to strengthen these connections is to work on mindfulness. We work on this in our health class because it's so important, and it can sometimes be called meditation. The whole purpose of mindfulness is to work on becoming more present and aware in your environment, which is actually going to strengthen that mindful region of your brain, preventing you from becoming more stressed out in the future. When you are in a stressful situation, however, the whole idea of all these treatments is to work on activating your cognitive brain. Since your emotional brain is basically overpowering the rest of your brain, by activating these cognitive regions, it's going to allow you to calm down. Some ways to activate your cognitive regions include just trying to rationalize and think about the situation, think about big picture effects or the likelihoods of something negative to happen. And although this might not sound effective, that actually is going to activate your thinking and problem solving skills. Another way to activate your cognitive brain that I thought was interesting is just try naming all the emotions you can feel during that stressful situation. That might not sound like it would be effective, but you're basically tricking your brain without even realizing it to thinking, which is going to activate that prefrontal cortex. Lastly, you can also use mindfulness even during a stressful situation. And a way to do this is try naming 5 things you can hear, 5 things you can see, smell, touch. You just want to activate any of your senses because that's going to make you brain. The last tip is try taking deep breaths, and we've all heard this before, but it's actually really effective because by increasing that oxygen flow to your brain, it's actually going to stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system, which is going to act as the brake and slow you down, which will make you feel less stressed during the situation. Okay, it still doesn't work. The connections to biology of my project is obviously this is dealing with the human brain, which is part of human biology and anatomy, as well as the fight or flight, the stress response, is an ingrained part of our human biology because it's so important for survival. It's been there for a long time. Some of the challenges I dealt with during this project was definitely time management. At the beginning, I did not use the time I was given to really finish up my research and focus, which caused me to fall behind initially on what I was supposed to be completing. However, this project actually allowed me to become a better learner because I had to learn how to hold myself accountable for what I was getting done, and I began setting smaller tasks for myself every other day to complete, which allowed me to finish my research and this presentation on time. And that's my presentation. Any questions? Okay, thank you. Stopped working.
Yeah.
Can't you click it?
Did that
Because
create
probably
A little bit.
you can do it on your screen.
No, I thought it like shuts it down. Remember it sent that little notification? Oh, you need the microphone. Was that long? Like the rest of my project. I was like, oh, what's my next one? Okay. Yeah, I already did.
So my name is Ruby, and I decided to do my 20% project on deja vu. So before I start, I just want to ask everybody, how many of you have experienced deja vu in your life? So that's good, a lot of you have. So does anybody ever wonder why they get it? Does anybody have any suggestions? Okay, that's okay, that's what I'm here for. So I project because oftentimes whenever I experience deja vu, I always wonder why I'm experiencing it, whether it's some sort of signal from the universe or just that I've been in a similar situation. So in French, déjà vu translates to already seen, which kind of encouraged me to choose this as my topic because that does tell me that déjà vu could have been something that I've already seen in another life or some sort of message. And because oftentimes people describe déjà vu as a wrong familiarity with something that they shouldn't be familiar with at all, kind of encouraged me to choose this as my topic because oftentimes whenever I experience déjà vu, that's what happens to me. So there is actually no known cause for deja vu. So instead, I researched 8 theories that can explain deja vu. And my objective and my purpose for choosing this as my topic was kind of to better my own knowledge on why I experienced deja vu, and for also open the eyes to my audience, because now you know that deja vu has no cause. So my first theory that I researched was precognition. So this theory is explaining deja vu as something that your mind has foresaw before you physically experience it, almost as if you're seeing into the future, which would then result in the familiar feeling you get, or deja vu. So my second theory is spiritual significance. So this is more an odd theory for deja vu, but it's basically telling you that you're getting some sort of individualized message from the universe that's granting a hidden message meant only for you. And although this is kind of an odd theory, this could be the right one, or because deja vu is a very individualized experience. Like in my case, whenever I'm experiencing deja vu, no one else around me is experiencing it at the same time with the same triggers. So my third theory is precognitive dream. So personally, I think this is the most relevant theory with the most scientific evidence behind it. And it's basically saying that you've had this same or very similar experience in your dream, and now this is just a replay of it. So kind of going more into depth on this theory, deja vu, as I said, means already seen, whereas deja reve means already dreamed. So this is basically saying that you've seen this in a dream before. So there are 3 kinds of deja reve. The first one is that you're seeing your dream or nightmare in front of you. The second type is just the familiarity that you're getting, that you know it's coming from a dream, but it's not the exact same. And the third is that you are actually inside of your dream again, and that you're experiencing the exact same thing again. So this is actually a new phenomenon, and there's not a lot of scientific evidence behind it, but it's a newly researched idea. So my fourth theory is mental illness. And although this is not the most accurate due to the population studies that most people are not mentally ill, sometimes deja vu is associated with some mental illnesses such as schizophrenia or dissociative identity disorder, which is also known as multiple personality disorder. So this is not the most accurate just because most population studies say that a lot of people experience deja vu, which I found out as I asked you, most of you had. So this is not the most accurate because of that. So my fifth theory is cryptomnesia. So this theory is explaining deja vu as something in your mind that you've seen before, and it's your mind recorded it as a memory, but you simply forgot. So this is kind of like subconsciously in your memory, and when you're experiencing a very similar situation again, this memory is coming back and it feels like a new feeling, even though that's why you experience this odd familiarity. So my sixth theory is brain synapses. So this is saying that, so oftentimes deja vu is associated with the patients with epilepsy. So before seizure, oftentimes they'll experience a strong sense of deja vu. And this, more specifically, those with temporal lobe epilepsy will experience deja vu. And although this does not relate to everybody, it only is more specific with epileptic patients, this does give researchers some sort of idea of where deja vu can occur, which would be the temporal lobe. And your temporal lobe is towards the side of your brain and is kind of in charge of memory and like stimuli like auditory and pain. And so this does give researchers some sort of idea of where deja vu can originate. So my seventh theory is another one of those odd theories that are hard to prove in research, but it's past life. So this is a pretty simple theory that's saying that in another one of your lives, a previous life, you've had a very similar or the same experience, and now you're just experiencing it again. And so triggers in some sort of life, in your present life, is triggering this deja vu. So my final theory that I researched was parallel life. And this is another, more of a science fiction idea that is another one of those hard to research and hard to prove. But it's basically saying that there are multiple versions of yourself living in a parallel universe. And in this theory, another one of you in these parallel universes is living out your life with decisions that you didn't make. So at one point in this parallel universe, you could have lived a very similar or the same experience, which would then trigger you in your present life to feel the feeling of deja vu. So my connections to biology, so obviously deja vu has a lot to do with your brain and your memory. And memory, more specifically, requires two cooperating processes, recollection and familiarity. So familiarity is obviously just the sense that you've seen something before or felt something before. And recollection is kind of, when these two processes become out of sync, deja vu can be the result. But it, of course, is unknown, but this could be one idea. So kind of after creating this presentation, I learned a lot, obviously, about deja vu and the 8 theories that I researched, but also I learned a lot about myself and my learning style. So I learned a lot about time management and how important it is to have a really detailed plan when you're going into a large project like this one. Some of the challenges that I faced when I was completing this project was, in the very start, was choosing my topic, because this is such an open-ended project with so many possibilities that you can choose. Choosing my topic was a pretty hard thing to do. So another thing that was one of my challenges was organization, and although I'm a very organized person, I think organizing my time was definitely one of my challenges, just because we had so much time to work on this project. It was complicated to find the right time to complete everything. Another thing was waiting to the last minute, which I didn't do, but waiting to the last minute to kind of start my presentation and have a good idea of what I wanted to get done, which is hard when you're trying to do a large research project, because if you don't know what you're doing, then you can't plan out a project. And another one, it's not so related, but the fact that deja vu has no real known cause was kind of hard, because instead of creating a project with lots of scientific evidence about why deja vu occurs, instead I had to plan my project on the 8 theories that I discovered. So some of my possible next steps, I think, would definitely be researching more about each theory and possibly getting rid of some of the theories that are just not provable. I personally think that the theory on dreams was definitely one of the most accurate and one that could definitely be researched a lot more, and kind of finding more of the science behind it. So thank you for watching, and I hope this opened your eyes to this odd experience of deja vu. And probably every time you think you have deja vu, you're going to think of this presentation. So thank you. Oh, are there any questions? Oh, are there any questions? Yeah.
Did you address stress and how it might be linked to deja vu?
I did not actually discuss that, and that definitely could be an idea, just because if there's a lot of things going on in your mind, you might just lose track of what you might have seen and you might experience deja vu, but I did not really focus on that. That could possibly be some of my next steps, relating it to more things going on in your brain and how it could be triggered by something like that.
So leading up to this presentation, did you have any more instances of deja vu?
I actually did. Well, not that's really relating to my project, but I did notice that I had deja vu, and I think twice, which is kind of odd. I don't know how often people get it, but for me, it's just so random. And I don't remember what I have deja vu on. Maybe if I wrote them down, and there could be some sort of study.
So is it just more of a feeling then?
Yeah, for me, it's I can't wrap my mind around it. I know I've seen this before. I know I've seen these same things and experienced the same feeling before, but it's just you can't wrap your mind around it. You don't know, it's just so odd. Any more questions?
What do you think about the parallel universe theory,
I think it's not easy. You can't really research that. That's definitely like something that far in the future, if that's actually a thing. I don't know. Any other questions?
So if there's a parallel universe, is the other person having deja vu about, right? Right.
Maybe they're connected.
I think that would be Sammy Joe's favorite theory.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great job.
Oh yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jeevan Anand, and I'm doing my passion project on the story of phobias. How different would life be without fear? Imagine how many opportunities are passed up because of fear. How does fear affect your everyday life? These are some questions for you all to think about during my presentation. About 7 years ago, I went to my friend's house and he had a brand new zip line in a very high tree. I did not think much about my fear of heights, but when I started climbing the tree, sweat started running down my head and my hands started to shake. When I finally got to the top, I was shaking with fear. After holding on for dear life at the top of the tree, I finally gathered myself and went down the zip line. When I touched the ground, I instantly felt relieved. When I was a young child, I went out very early in the morning to put the garbage on the curb. It was very early in the morning, so I still had on my night clothes, thinking it would only take a couple of minutes. On the way to the curb, I remember stepping on something. Before I could look down and see what I had stepped on, a bunch of bees started flying around me like a tornado. The bees went all in my clothes and were stinging me everywhere. I was screaming at the top of my lungs as my father came outside running. He ran over to me and tore off whatever I was wearing to reveal a large amount of bee stings all over my body. I didn't know if I was crying from the stings or embarrassment. Since that very day, I have a sickening feeling in my stomach when a bee comes anywhere near me. I always had a funny feeling when I was near a tall cliff or building, but never knew why or what it was from. I then heard a story about myself when I was about 1 or 2 years old, when my family went on a vacation to a lake. There was one retaining wall that dropped about 3 or 4 feet down to the water. From what I have heard, my neighbor was running by and bumped into me and knocked me into the water. He was then the first one to jump in to save me. This has led to my very specific fear of someone being behind me when I am high up or in a vulnerable spot to fall. One night about 5 years ago, I was getting ready for bed. I remember getting into bed all ready to fall asleep as I turned off the lights. I felt something touch my leg. I didn't think twice about it since I was so tired. I felt it again and again and again. So I got up and I turned on the lights and yanked the cover off my bed. In the middle of my bed, there was a huge spider crawling around the sheets trying to find a spot to hide. I remember screaming for my dad, telling him to kill it instantly. Since that very day, I consider myself having the fear of spiders. In all the stories I've collected, there has been one common theme. People say they are willing to overcome their fear, but when the time comes to face it, they are way too scared. As I was choosing which stories to share, I tried to pick a variety of different phobias most people have. This way, even people in the audience could have a broader takeaway from my presentation. To overcome such an extreme fear as a phobia, the key is to change your mindset when you are facing it. Most people have told me that they are way too scared to even look at a picture of their phobia, but in order to progress to eliminate it, they have to face it. The mindset is the most important piece of information I have come across in my research. When you are in the right state of mind, nothing should ever scare you. As I was choosing my topic for this presentation, I was thinking about what is one thing in the world that everyone suffers from. As I started my research, I came across the idea of fear. This surprised me as I never thought of fear as a disease. In a way, fear controls people's lives in a way they don't even realize. The idea of making people get rid of their fear inspired me to try to figure out a way to at least help people make progress in getting rid of their phobia. As I started researching the topic more and more, I realized this really interested me. Fear affects everyone. No matter if you are scared of something as big as the ocean or as small as a drop of water, fear affects everyone. An estimated 9.1% of Americans are affected by phobias, and over 19 million people have a specific phobia. Through my research, I have discovered that if people can talk, ask, and answer questions about their phobias, they will most likely progress faster in getting rid of it. Through my research, I've came across the top 8 most common phobias people suffer from. They include arachnophobia, the fear of spiders, ophidiophobia, the fear of spiders, acrophobia, the fear of heights, agoraphobia, the fear of open or crowded spaces, cynophobia, the fear of dogs, astrophobia, the fear of thunder and lightning, claustrophobia, the fear of small spaces, and mysophobia, the fear of germs. Can anyone in the audience relate to any of these phobias? This is very important to the people in the world today because so many people are affected by phobias. My goal for this project is to have a set of steps that one can do when they are interacting with their phobia, what to do after an interaction, and how to eventually get rid of their phobia for good. 10% of the world suffers from a mental disorder of having a phobia. That's right, having a phobia is considered a mental disorder. If people with phobias knew exactly how to handle it, this would no longer be a problem the world suffers from. In all, the world would end up becoming a better place. Some challenges I encountered during my project included finding people who had a severe life-threatening phobia in the Worcester Academy community. I interviewed 10 people who claimed they had a phobia, but not one said affected their life in a life-threatening way. I also did not know many people outside the Worcester Academy community with a severe phobia, so this did limit my interview research. Another challenge I faced was when asking people what they were thinking or feeling during an interaction with a phobia. They would say, "I don't remember, I was too scared." I overcame the main challenge of interviewing people with severe phobias by interviewing all the people I could who claimed they had a phobia and comparing their symptoms with the other 9 people. The main goal for this project was to make a collection of all the stories of people's phobias I have collected and share them with a broader community. In this collection, at the end of every story, there will be a step-by-step paragraph on how the person can try different methods to outgrow or even get rid of their phobia. This will be through the research I've done in what causes fear and how to get rid of it. The goal for my final product for this project ends up helping people understand how fear is caused and how to lessen or get rid of it. Next steps for this project include furthering my research on fear and phobias, and even just talking to a couple people with a severe life-threatening phobia and see how their stories compare to some of the classmates and teachers I interviewed for this project. This would really help me understand how different people react to different fears and how their state of mind affects how scared they are of something. Throughout this 20% project, I feel I've learned a lot about myself and things I wouldn't have known without doing this project. One major thing I didn't know was I could plan out work over a long period of time and set and meet my own deadlines. I also figured out some things I know I need to work on and improve, such as distractions while working and not giving myself too much work at once. Overall, this project has been a very good learning experience, and I am very glad I did it. So now I have some trivia questions about phobias, so try to answer them as best you can. What is the correct term for the fear of snakes? Yes. Yes, C. What is the correct term for the fear of water? Yes. Yeah, that's correct. What is the definition of phobia? Yes.
I'm going to say A.
Yeah, right again. Thank you for listening. Does anyone have any questions? All right. Thank you.
Think of one of your loved ones. Your mom, dad, son, daughter, grandma, grandpa, cousins, your best friends, anyone. They have cancer. Imagine someone telling them that it's their fault, that they are the reason they have such an awful sickness, that their life choices led them to having a disease. Imagine someone telling them that they're a freak and should just kill themselves because no one will ever love a sick person. What would you say to them? What would you do? Would you hold their hand while they fought, or would you walk away? Now, what if the disease wasn't cancer? What if the illness wasn't physical, but mental? Would your previous answer stay the same? For those of you who don't know me, my name is Aishwarya Narayanan, or Aisha for short. I'm from Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, and this is my first year here at Worcester Academy. I decided that it would be best to give you all a little crash course about my life before I really got into my presentation. So, I was born on May 10th in 2004 in Worcester, Massachusetts. I've lived in Shrewsbury for my whole life except for the brief period of time where we lived in Connecticut. My family consists of me, my mom and dad, and my older sister, Akila. My sister is the person who gave me the inspiration to do this project. We're best friends. We've been through hell together, and that doesn't stop us from being there for each other. We've never been the type of siblings who constantly fought. Despite our age difference of 5.5 years, we're closer than ever. We share each other's clothes, we like to watch the same TV shows, and we have a shared hatred for the pet fish that our parents bought. Recently, due to an unfortunate situation, we stopped talking for a while. I would describe the situation, but that would take me over an hour, and there are other presentations to hear. But long story short, we weren't there for each other. And most importantly, I wasn't there for her. Recently, she was diagnosed with clinical depression and anxiety. On October 18th of this year, she sent me a text. I tried to kill myself various times over the past few weeks. A few days ago, I went to the pool and I tried to drown myself. I started taking pills that the psychiatrist prescribed me for the depression and anxiety. One day, I took 4 of those and a bunch of Tylenol to overdose. It didn't work. I don't have anything to live for. At first, when I received this text, I was confused and I was shocked. I didn't think away. I walked away. And for that, I will always feel guilty. I should have seen the signs. In the May of last year, she had sent me another text saying that I was the only thing she had to live for. And at the time, I thought that was the nicest thing anyone could say to me, that someone cared about me that much to place their whole life in my hands. But looking back at it now, I realized that I was selfish. And for that, I will blame myself, and there's nothing anyone can say that will stop me from doing that. This project is somewhat of an apology. I know she isn't here right now and probably won't ever see this, but I just have to say, Akila, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you, but I promise from now on I will always have your back. So, on the first day of this project, we were given a brainstorming guide. On this sheet, it said, brainstorming. No ideas should be rejected, whether you consider them good or bad. Now, I could have done something I was actually interested in, like pageants or neonatology, but no. I took it as a challenge and decided to put the oddest things on my list, like churn butter, run a marathon, run a 6-minute mile, get a pet dog, visit every continent, sleep for 13 hours a day, make soap, make candles, make vegan chocolate chip cookies, find a needle in a haystack, and figure out how many licks it takes to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop. I immediately took off things like running a marathon and visiting every continent, because that just wouldn't be possible for me to do. And at the end, I narrowed it down to my top 3, which were making vegan chocolate chip cookies, making candles, and making soap. The first one to go was making vegan chocolate chip cookies, because I can't bake. I can't bake normal chocolate chip cookies, I can't bake muffins, I can't make non-vegan food, so it wouldn't be plausible for me to think that I could make vegan food. And then the next one to go was soap. At first I was really into this idea, but then I realized that you use soap on your skin. And if someone had an allergic reaction, it would be my fault. And I didn't feel like having people be mad at me. So I was left with candles. But I couldn't just make candles. It had to be more meaningful than that. Which is why I decided to connect it to mental illnesses. So what is a mental illness? This is such a big part of my project, and there's a chance that I could fumble my words while talking up here, and it would just confuse all of you, and I wouldn't be able to describe it properly, which is why I decided to make it into a video. So this not only would target auditory learners, but also visual learners like myself.
Mental illness can anyone. Think and act. It's important at every stage of life so we can cope with stress, work productively, and make meaningful contributions to our community. However, the statistics are staggering. Over 45% of teens suffer from a mental illness. And and 1 in 5 teens suffer from a severe mental disorder. That's 20% of our teen population. Mental illnesses are brain function disorders. They have many causes and result from complex interactions between a person's genes and their environment. A person struggling with mental health cannot be viewed any different than if someone was experiencing a physical illness. Mental illness is not a choice nor a failure. It does not discriminate and can affect anyone, regardless of age, gender, sexuality, or ethnicity. In fact, mental illnesses occur at similar rates around the world, in every culture. The concern with mental health isn't just about statistics, it's about well-being. A mental illness makes things like work, school, and socializing difficult. It's not always clear when a problem is mood or thinking, because it can be serious enough to be concerned. Sometimes a depressed mood is normal, such as when a person experiences the loss of a loved one. But if that depressed mood continues to cause distress or gets in the way of normal daily functioning, the person may benefit from professional care. A mental illness is just as valid as a physical one and needs to be taken seriously. They are difficult to deal with. As a community, we need to come together and support those suffering from mental illnesses.
So that's what a mental illness is. And for my project, since there's a plethora of mental illnesses that I could have targeted, I just chose the ones that interested me the most and that I knew essential oils and aromatherapy would work for. So the ones I targeted were insomnia, depression, bipolar disorder, and anxiety. I also tried to target mental health related issues because your mental health is still important even if you don't suffer from a mental illness. I'm going to give you a brief description of all the mental illnesses, but if you would like to have a more in-depth understanding, I have a packet explaining what each of the mental illnesses are. So starting with insomnia, insomnia is the inability to fall asleep or stay asleep even if you have the chance to do so. So it's not staying up till 3 a.m. studying for a test because you can sleep, you just chose not to. Depression, which many of you know, it's the lack of interest in things. You lose your interest in things you used to enjoy, and you become the shell of the person that you once were. Bipolar disorder is the change in extreme moods, and these moods are called mania and depression, which are also called the highs and lows. Anxiety is your body reacting to stress, and it's intrusive thoughts that affect your daily life. Stress is your body's natural reaction to change, and for focusing, I focused on the inability to follow through with tasks or concentrate. So what is aromatherapy? Aromatherapy is a holistic healing treatment in which aromatic essential oils are used to improve the health of the mind, body, and spirit. With this project, I'm not trying to say that if you smell a candle, if you smell a peppermint scented candle, your depression will go away. Or if you I'm not saying that all your problems will go away. What I'm trying to do with my project is provide a resource which people who suffer from mental illnesses can use to make their life more tolerable. Cookies are sugar cookies, but due to the 6-word limit on our slides, I had to take out the word sugar. But that one was for stress and overall happiness. Lavender was for insomnia. Cinnamon was for bipolar disorder. Pine was for focusing. Peppermint was for depression, and sandalwood was for anxiety. How essential oils work is that you use your olfactory system. The molecules of the essential oil, it goes through your nose and into your lungs, which then goes to other parts of your body. In an experiment, 31 men and women were told to smell lavender essential oil before going to bed. And then the next night, they were told to smell distilled water. Researchers then used brain scans to see that they had a more sound sleep. So my candles. Just be because I'm incapable of making a successful DIY. Recipe for making candles that I really enjoyed. Some of them were too expensive and the others just had way too many confusing steps. I took parts of all of these different recipes I found and made my own. But that still doesn't mean it was easy. If you notice my finger, this happened this morning while I was cutting the wick off of one of my candles. So what I do to make my candles is I melt soy wax in any container I can find, and then I pour that into my candle jars. But thanks to one of my friends, I realized that I could use a syringe, and that would make the whole process so much easier. I then put in 4 to 5 drops of whatever essential oil I'm using, and if I'm not satisfied with the smell, I add more, or I put in more wax to dilute the smell. Little reflection. So I want to start off by thanking everyone who helped me with this process. My friends Anastasia and Yana aren't here, but I know they're watching on the live stream because they told me they would. So thank you for telling me that my first candles looked like crayons and smelled like rotten oranges. Because without you, I would still be making candles that smelled like rotten oranges. So, candles may have not been something I was necessarily passionate about, that this little thing can improve your mental health. It may not be easy today, but at some point, things will get better. You are important. Thank you. Are there any questions?
What was the most challenging thing about this project?
Making the candles, definitely. So they're really cheap. Thank you.
He's here. I'm so Jay has done a lot of the field experiences with his brother, and I felt like
Should I clip it to my tire? Okay. Eh. Jay? Oh, okay. Should I just... Maybe the... Okay. Hello everyone, I'm Jay again, and I'm going to be talking about memory. So what is my focus? So like I said, I'm going to be talking about memory, and in particular, I would like to focus on two aspects of memory. First is improving the efficiency and the effectiveness of memorizing a concept. And the second is the effect of Alzheimer's and other diseases that impact your memory and how they affect your brain, and what can be done to alleviate that. So why did I choose this topic? So over the last couple of weeks, I've had a lot of tests and stuff to study for, and I have a final coming up, or a couple of them, and I've had to recall information that I learned from way earlier in this year, and I found that to be a pretty challenging task. And so I've been using tools such as Quizlet, which I'm sure a lot of the students in this room know. It's where you just put in flashcards and you just memorize them as often as you can. And so this hasn't been the most easy task for me. And I think there's better ways to memorize concepts. And that's one thing I've been exploring over the past couple of weeks as I've been working on this project. Along with this, a couple years back, I found out my grandmother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. and it's one of those things that could be passed down through my genes. So it's one of those things that's been staying in the back of my mind because I might get it, and exercising your memory is a great way to counteract the effects of Alzheimer's. So what did I make? So I made an app which combines 3 main memorization concepts. So mnemonics, repetition, and word ties. If you don't know what any of these means, that's okay. I'm going to go into them right now, as you've probably seen. Oh, this slide isn't even supposed to be there. So the first concept is a mnemonic. So a mnemonic is a learning technique which takes a word or phrase and another word or phrase, and which is more unique, and connects them in your brain. So this might sound a little complicated or confusing, but it really isn't. You've probably already used a mnemonic or heard of one before. The easiest one I can think of that a lot of people know is one for a compass. So maybe when you were learning a compass way back when, your teacher might have told you something like, never eat soggy waffles. That stands for north, east, south, and west. I know I've been using this even now, and I've known the compass for a couple of years now. So I created a mnemonic for this presentation. So Mr. T, that's this guy over here if you don't know. So mnemonic is M, repetition is R, and word ties is T, Mr. T. So the second part of that, the R is repetition. So again, repetition is also a pretty simple concept. We've probably all practiced repetition, and it's one of those things that teachers instill in you, like you should practice every day, but it's one of those things that almost no one does. Because repetition is a really time-consuming task, and the way most people advocate for repetition is just blindly memorizing something over and over. So these tools I've been using.
Take the USB out.
Oh. So the tools I've been using, Quizlet, have been just dumb flashcards, I'd say. So I'm studying for my Spanish final, so I would take the word hello and put it on one side of the flashcard. And then on the other side, I would put the word hola. And then as often as I remember, I would go and I would study these. Now, I'm not really great at keeping track of when to study, so I wouldn't do these often. And when I would have to study, usually the night before a test, I would be studying all of my flashcards, and it really isn't the most effective way to remember these terms. So I did a little more research, and I came across a concept called spaced repetition. So spaced repetition is also pretty simple. Basically what it is you're breaking up the amount of time between when you're practicing something and increasing that interval as you are getting more comfortable with the subject. So the first day you learn the word, let's say hello and hola, you might remember it after only 10 minutes. So this is called the forgetting curve, and it says that after 20 minutes of learning something, you are most likely to forget it if you haven't committed it to memory. So my app will then remind you of it after 20 minutes, right as you're on the cusp of forgetting it, in order to strengthen the connection in your brain. And then after that, if you get it right, it will remind you in an hour, then 9 hours, then a day, then a week, and so forth. And the whole concept behind this is that right as you're on the cusp of forgetting something, it strengthens, like I said, it strengthens the connection in your brain, and it makes it easier for you to remember it in the future. So this is a lot more effective than just blindly memorizing it like I was doing in the past, because it's more time efficient, and obviously we have a lot of things going on as the year wraps up, and this is a great way for me to make the best use of my time. So the final concept is word ties, or word associations. So this is again a pretty simple concept. So some of you might be wondering why there's a gecko up here. So all word ties is associating a word or a phrase or a concept with something you can imagine or visualize, or something that evokes a sense. So this gecko might seem familiar because it appears in all of the Geico commercials. It'll pop up one moment. And that's because the gecko is such a unique animal, and you probably don't see it that often outside of these commercials. So when it does show up, your brain puts the connection between gecko and Geico. So you might have been wondering why there are lemons on each of my slides, because lemons have nothing to do with memory at all. And the same thing with the gecko. Gecko has nothing to do with car insurance, yet we all remember this guy up here. So how does it all fit together? So I made an app which combines these 3 concepts. So going back to my Spanish final, I'm going to show you how I'd use it. So when I'm studying for my Spanish, I would put in a vocab term. Let's go back to hello and hola. And I would put that in, and my app will spit back out a mnemonic for the word hello and hola. and then it would remind me of it using that forgetting curve I talked about earlier. And it also assigns each of these terms a unique color in order to invoke a word tie in your brain. So the mnemonics on their own are not too useful. It's probably easier for you to just remember hello and hola. But when your brain looks at the mnemonics and then looks at the words, it helps it to remember because it has yet another association between the concepts, and it's just yet another thing for you to call upon in order to remember. So how did I make it? So I've never made an app before, and the first couple of sessions I spent were figuring out what I was doing and how I was going to spend the rest of my time. And I faced my first hurdle. So to get it to be on my phone and be able to easily test it and showcase it, I would either have to shell out $100 for a developer license, or I would have to go through a really time-consuming process, which would eat away more time in the already limited time span we had to work on this. So I did a lot more research on it, and I found a set of tools which makes it easier for me to build the app, because as soon as I edit the changes, it pops up immediately on my phone. And this was something that is new, and there wasn't really much on it. There wasn't much information about it on the internet, but I think it was a really great win for me because it made it a lot easier for me to develop because, like I said, as soon as I made a change, it really popped up right on my phone. An added benefit to this was that I could have it on my phone at zero cost. So after I figured out what I was doing, I started work on implementing the mnemonics. So the first version of the mnemonics generator was pretty simple and basically useless. It took a word and then it spit out another word with the same starting letter. Now obviously this isn't really that useful. So I taught the mnemonic generator the concept of sentences. So instead of just spitting out a random word with the same first letter, it would use adjectives, nouns, and verbs in order to get a more cohesive sentence, which your brain could think about more logically. Like the never eat soggy waffles. Do you remember that because it's a sentence and you can think about the next word a lot more easier because it's a sentence. After that, I moved on to the spaced repetition part of it. This was probably the most straightforward part of the whole project. It was because there's a lot of information about it online, and I could really just follow in other people's footsteps when implementing that. But the only problem with this is that it took up a lot of time. It might have been smooth sailing, but it took up a lot of time. And when I got to the last concept, I wanted to incorporate the word ties. I really didn't have that much time. I actually just finished that up like 5 hours ago, so yeah. Does it work? Yeah, so I have it running right here. And it's kind of small, but you can get a general glimpse. Or I might be able to make it bigger, actually. Nope, okay. So I'm just going to type in something. Let's type in the presentation. And then you can see it types a mnemonic up here. And this is just Mr. T. I put that in already. And then we go over to history, and it'll load up in 1 second, but it has a list of all the terms, and each term has a unique color. Here we go. So over here we have the northeast, southwest, never eat soggy waffles. Then we have the concepts I use and Mr. T. And notice how each of these is a unique color. And the app will then, if I were to leave this running, it would then remind me of it after the 20 minutes I talked about earlier, and then the day and so forth, and prompt me to fill in the answer. So how does this connect to biology? So obviously memory occurs in your brain, and memory is a synaptic connection between two neurons, and that might sound a little complicated, and it was complicated for me when I was looking at it. And I found an analogy which is like a river. So when you're first memorizing something, it's like when a river first starts out flowing. It takes any path it can take, but then as the river continues to flow, the path it takes becomes more defined, and that's similar to how you memorize. So every time you're pulling up the flashcard, the river gets more defined and the path it takes is more concentrated. So when you memorize something, it first starts out in your frontal lobe right here. This is where all your short-term memory is stored. And then after your brain starts committing something to memory, it travels over here to the hippocampus. And your hippocampus really has two main responsibilities. It connects your memories to past experiences like deja vu, and it also works on focusing and creating new associations. So as you are remembering something, the memory actually passes through the hippocampus and creates yet another association and synaptic connection for you to memorize. After you do it and you commit something to long term, it gets stored up here in the cerebral cortex, all around here. And if I were to draw this as like a web, maybe to make it easier. So going back to Spanish, we have like a dot here. Here's the neuron for hello. And then we'll go over here, and then we have one for hola. And this is the connection. And every time we practice this, it travels it again and makes it stronger. But along with this, we have different connections. So let's say we had another word, the mnemonics generated. Let's say it generated a different word. Let's say hula. Completely different, completely random. You probably won't even remember this, but it's just another thing for you to look at. But it starts creating a web, and obviously it gets a lot more large and more interconnected, and it just gives your brain more associations to connect to and call upon when you're asked to recall a term. So what are my next steps? So I've really only have like a prototype so far. Obviously, as you've seen in the app, it doesn't really look nice at all, and it probably isn't the easiest to use if you don't know what you're doing or have experience with it like I do. So I would definitely like to work on polishing that off. I think right now the weakest part is the word ties. Obviously, that was the most time-constrained part of it. And in the end, I chose to go with a more simpler version of it, the colors coding of it, so I could just get a basic understanding and showcase what I think I could achieve with it. As I move forward, I would like to make it a little more complex and a little more useful. So I have an idea to take the term and then do a Google search for it, the app would, and pull back an image. So let's say I want to memorize the term for biology, in Spanish is biología. It would do a Google search and pull out an image for a biology classroom and show that toward next to the flashcard. Again, that would just help to create a connection between the two terms. Along with this, I would like to run like focus groups and ask people how they would use the app and see how it could be better tweaked to fit their needs. I would like to try it out with students and patients with Alzheimer's and see if the forgetting curve needs to be tweaked to more suit patients with Alzheimer's. That's something that really hasn't been researched. Is the forgetting curve the same with patients with Alzheimer's, or will it need to be tweaked and modified to better fit their needs? That's something I'm really interested in focusing on in the future. And thank you. Anyone have any questions? Neil?
Where is your memory stored in the brain?
So your brain, the memories, once they go through here, this is where your short-term memory is. This is called the frontal lobe. And then it goes here, and this is actually what processes your memories and builds the associations between them. And then after that, it gets stored anywhere around here in any of the cerebral cortex section.
Can you say that in kid-friendly language?
It starts here, goes here, and then here. So if you like rub the top of your head, that's where your memories are. Anyone else?
So this is, I use a program called Speechify, which takes any type of text and converts it to something audio. This is exactly how Speechify, which is now a multi-million-dollar company, ended up beginning, just with an idea like this. So where do you go from here? I mean, and how do you end up polishing? Do you have a plan, a map to end up polishing this up and using maybe AI to specifically pull images off of the net?
Yeah, so that's actually something that's been like solved before. So there's actually like really accessible tools online that I can just put in a term like biology, and then it will automatically pull me back images, like similar to how when you do a search of biology, it will pull back images of biology. So like I said, I just want to focus on polishing it off first. I think right now it's pretty rough, and it could definitely use more polish and more time put into it. After that, I think focusing on using it as a learning tool will be the most easy because I have the most experience with it and I've been using it over the past couple of weeks studying for these finals. So I would like to, get feedback from people and see what they would need to make it more useful.
Could you demonstrate how you use the app to study for your final?
Yeah. So I've been entering in terms. So my terms aren't in here because I think that would be a little too confusing. But let's say I would type in, let's do hello so I don't forget how to spell it. And then hola. And then we'll spit back out a word. And you might not see it from there, but it says henchman. So obviously I won't remember the word henchman, but when I glance at it, as in when the app reminds me of it, over the next 20 minutes, I will then look at the word henchman and then I might remember it when thinking about it in the future. And when asked on the final, what's the word for hello, my brain might go to henchman and then might go to hola.
How are you going to use this next year?
Well, haven't really thought about that. I'm really focusing on passing this year first. Obviously, so the really good thing about spaced repetition is it's really good for memorizing something over a long period of time, because as you continue to use it, the intervals between the practice sessions get longer as you commit more of it to memory. So if I were to start using this at the beginning of the year instead of the end, I think it would be a lot more useful for studying for my finals, because I've been constantly practicing these topics since the beginning of the year, and it wouldn't have taken up too much of my time because of how it works.
So are you going to incorporate some sort of testing where you can quiz yourself, show the henchman, and then type in hola?
Yeah, for sure. So like I said, before this, I was using Quizlet, and that's one of the main features of it, where it asks you to, it gives you the term and then asks you to give the definition. That's definitely something I could see working in this, and it would definitely work together with the other aspects of the app. Anyone else?
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for staying. Thank you for the great questions. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. Have a safe drive home. And just make sure you can put all of your feedback forms in the center, and I'll use them to incorporate into my comments. Thank you. Have a great night.
Oh, if you guys want to buy candles, that would be great. They're $2 per candle.